So good evening, Rotarians and colleagues of peace. I am Jim Halderman, chair of the District 5450 Peace Committee and the sponsor of the Forum for Discussion. I'm going to assume you've all read Steve Killilea's amazing bio. The bio I send out is what I received from the speaker themselves. There were, however, a few things Steve, I think, forgot to include. For one, Steve's founding of IEP was recognized as one of the 50 most impactful philanthropic gifts in Australia's history. He was honored as a member of the Order in Australia for his service to the global peace movement. In 2013, Steve was nominated one of the top 100 most influential people in armed violence reduction by the UK group Action of Armed Violence. He produced a film, Soldiers of Peace, that won Best Feature Film at the Monaco International Film Festival. It was shown and award-winning at the 2009 Cannes Festival. So we are very fortunate tonight to have someone with such an extensive and creative background. Steve, the screen is now yours.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Jim. It's very nice to be here. There's obviously a number of people here I can see I know very, very well. So that's excellent. And so I've got a presentation. The presentation will run about 20 minutes, and then if we've got time, we can open it up to some questions afterwards. So I'm just going to share my screen, but I can't see. Just gotta can't see the desktop here. Just give me a second. Here we go. Right. Okay, can we see this presentation coming up now?
Yes, you can. Yes, we can.
Great. Okay.
Yes.
All right. That pace. I'll throw it up. Okay, great. Okay, so okay, all right. I think we're in business now. Excellent. So the presentation will cover basically the state of peace. So it'll give it a little bit of an overview for the Institute for Economics and Peace, for those who don't know it. A short coverage on the state of global peace, and then a very short coverage on what creates peace, and then we'll finish up with a slide on the IEP's engagement with Rotary and some idea of some of the stuff which is coming. So without more to do, the Institute for Economics and Peace was set up to understand the intersection between business, peace, and economics. Place a special emphasis on metrics to measure peace, and then to ascribe an economic value to changes in peace. So we've got a number of different ways we reach out to the world. So one of them is through public discourse. So last year we had 74 billion media impressions globally. That was up 60% on the prior year, and was about 23,000 different media articles which covered it. IEP's researchers regularly reference just one example, as we had successive UN Secretary Generals reference our cost of violence to the global economy. And each year we do over 200 public speaking engagements, of which this would be one. The research impact is quite substantial now. Last year we had over 2,000 academic references from various journals and published articles in reference to our work. We do a lot of contract research these days for a range of organisations, including UN, World Bank, Commonwealth Secretariat, OECD, and literally millions of our reports get read each year. We get about 1 million downloaded from our sites, but then there's many, many more from others. And obviously, many of you would understand our training programs around positive peace. We now have about 6,500 ambassadors globally. That'd be about 150 countries, and we're bringing on about 1,000 a year. And we've had over 250,000 people now do our positive peace workshop, and with them in a wide range of different areas. So let's move on to let's move on, and let's now have a look at the state of global peace. Now, so this should be should have a whole lot of formatting with it, but it's not coming up. It's just sort of going like a PDF. Anyway, not to worry. I'm just going to stop sharing it, come back. It's got some great animations, and it'd be good if we could see the animations.
You have to click on the presentation. You're not in presentation.
Ah, okay. Thanks. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Okay, thought I had it up. That's why. Just give us a sec. Can't actually, on the screen I've got here, I can't see the button to actually push it up. I don't know why. Ah, got it. Okay, I'm away. Right. Okay, great. Okay, thanks for that. All right. Okay, so I'm going to cover a number of themes. The first one will cover the concept of global geopolitical fragmentation. So we can all see it. Now, we've got a number of ways of being able to measure influence by one country in other countries as well. We now can see that the fragmentation of influence is now the greatest since the end of the Second World War. What we're finding, there's an increased rising of middle-level power. So, for example, if we went back to 1991, 14 countries had influence, in what we call substantial influence in another country. That's up to 34 in 2023. And so this creates this diffusion of power. Now, this is not necessarily a good or a bad thing, but it's an eventuality. And we'll come back to a little bit more, but we believe that China's probably at the zenith of its actual zenith of its influence. It's not that it's going to go away. It's just that its influence is globally is probably not going to increase from here, other than maybe militarily. Where we can see there's more conflicts now than any time since the end of the Second World War, 59. And we've got 17 countries now with over 1,000 conflict deaths. Additionally, adding to this, we've got 78 countries which are involved in a conflict outside their own borders. And so that comes down to complicating a whole range of different conflicts. And I'll come back to that a little bit more further on. Now, many of these conflicts are at a risk of escalating even further. Ones we know of and which are already violent but run substantial risk of serious increases are Syria, DRC, South Sudan, Ethiopia and Kashmir. And we're obviously seeing an increase in militarisation. But what most people don't realise, the average country's militarisation has been decreasing for 15 years, up until the start of the Ukraine war. And so now we've had 84 countries increase their military expenditure last year, compared to only 50 which decreased. And Europe's leading the pack on this. The 34 countries we cover in Europe, 26 of them actually increased their military expenditure, with many of them now getting up near the 2% of GDP on military, with targets to get to 3.5. But along with this has come a reduction in peace building and peacekeeping. So what we can see is expenditures down 34%, but the number of peacekeepers is down 42%. Now I'm going to say something here which is really preaching to the converted, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you can't invest in peace, you're not going to create peace. And so we think one of the substantial issues today is the lack of investment into peace. So if we went back to the 1970s, what we found is that 49% of conflicts finished because of military victory. 23% finished because of some sort of peace agreement. When you get down to the 2010s, the number of conflicts solved militarily, that dropped to 9%. But more alarmingly, the number of peace agreements dropped to 4%. And so we've got this more conflicts, the 59, since the end of the Second World War. And we've also got what we'd call forever wars, ones which don't seem to stop. And so the underlying issue is the inability to be able to solve the conflicts. And I guess that's where everyone in this room comes in. So let's give you a quick idea of a mud map of the world. Red is very, very bad. Green is very, very good. United States is in the middle. It's about 34. You can see Australia is green, and we're in a pretty good part of the world. The next best part of the world would be Europe, but obviously there are issues these days with the war in the Ukraine. Now, this will give you an idea of the trend line. Going up is bad, coming down is good. And so if we look back over the last 17 years, peacefulness has declined 13 of those years. It's only improved 3 and was flat in 1 other. And look, it's really been 2014 since we've had an improvement in peace. And like that give an idea of just how tough things are. And it's the prognosis for the future, it's only going to get worse. Now, I mentioned there were 17,000 countries which had a conflict where more than 1,000 people were killed. So this will give you an idea of the countries globally. As you can see, most of those countries you'll actually know. Won't come as any surprise, but the size of the number of people killed, that might raise eyebrows. Palestine, you'll note we've only got 23,000, and that's because the figures we've got date back to 2023. We haven't got the 2024 figures in that as yet. But other ones of note is Pakistan, over 2,000, Brazil, 2,000, Mexico, 4,500. Now, this will give you an idea of the trend line for conflicts. Yeah. Now, I mentioned the number of conflicts with over 10,000 deaths. There's still another 18 countries where you've had more than 100 deaths. And so the total number of conflicts is the deaths from it. It did come down from the prior year, but what we would say, it's the second biggest year since we've been doing the records. External conflicts fought, the number of them just keep increasing, as I've mentioned, and the intensity internal conflict also keeps increasing, although it's a slight decrease the last 2 years, but this stage we'd say is probably more of a blip than something which is a trend. So now the world's entering a new era. So when we're calling this the great fragmentation, and I think this is probably the political trend which is most overlooked today. So now what we can see, and it's obvious to everyone, is that the international rules order, which the US has run for the last since the end of the Second World War, that's now in a decline. So the alliance between the major European liberal democracies, the US, and a number of others like Canada and Australia and Japan, that's now starting to break up. And as I mentioned, the number of middle level powers have increased since 1991 from 14 to 34. Some of the countries with the largest increases in influence are Turkey, Chechnya, India, South Africa, and Hungary, to name some. So now, as we're looking to this, a lot of this is based on the back of rising income. We'll find that the countries in the Arab Peninsula, the CCG countries, they're countries which are been increasing quite, whose influence have increased markedly, and they're very keen to increase that influence further. Most of these countries are interested in having influence within their region rather than globally, unlike, let's say, the US, China, and to a lesser extent, Russia. Now, quite often, they're not interested in aligning with the US or with China, and quite often will be within their region, will be in competition with those powers as well. So this is creating for what we call the fragmentation of the influence as we go forward. And again, I'd say it's neither a bad thing nor a good thing. You really have to look at the individual country and the way they're actually using influence. So the biggest falls have been traditional powers like the UK and France. And the US still remains the most influential country, but it's followed by China, which is about 40% less on the measures. But if we start to look at China now, we can find that the gross debt for China is now about 300% of GDP. So we all go back to the 1990s and remember Japan. We all thought Japan would dominate the world, and we can see where that turned out. China, we think, is at the same level. If we look at the foreign inbound, foreign direct investment for China, it's now fallen 95% in the last 3 years. And as with the measures of influence we've got, we've seen that it's plateaued for the last 3 years. And they're the reasons why we think it's probably at the zenith of its influence. Now, obviously, it's building out militarily, so we'll need to see where that goes. Now, this will give you an idea. In 1991, we've just picked 4 countries: China, Turkey, India, and Australia. This is the influence in 2023. So you can see the massive increase in those countries and just where they're actually becoming influential. So now, violence comes with a cost. So if we look at the cost of violence to the global economy in 2024, it literally came in at 11.6% of global GDP. That was about $20 trillion, or about $2,455 per person. Now, there are 40 countries in the world which have a lower per capita income. But those 40 countries with a lower per capita income are mainly conflict countries. So in stopping of conflicts is going to have the most benefit for the poorest people in the world. And so I think that's a really important consideration for us all to keep in mind. So now, if we're looking at the economic impact, we can see here the Ukraine, it's almost 60% of GDP. We can see it in Afghanistan, North Korea, Somalia. Now, if we look at the most peaceful nations and come up there, we can see that the impact is generally under about 5%, with Ireland actually, and Iceland leading the way, with Japan coming nearby. So let's have a little bit of a look now at the impact of the terrorism, and this will cover 2024 rather than to be up to date. So I'll give you an idea where the terrorist attacks have occurred globally. The epicenters in the Sahel, which you can see on the west coast of Africa there, that's Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, they're at the center. There are other really strong hotspots, up Syria, for example, and then also you can see up in Pakistan and around those areas of the world as well. Now, just if we look at the number of deaths in 2024, they stayed constant. That's after deducting the October the 7th attack by Hamas, as that was the second largest terrorist attack since we've been recording it. The biggest being obviously the Twin Towers attacks, so on September the 9th. So when we deduct for that, it's basically the same. So attacks also, they slightly fell, so 3,400. So at the top, it looks okay. But as you dig more under the figures, it starts to change. So the number of countries recording a terrorist incident actually increased from 58 to 66, a lot of them in the West, which I will come to. 45 countries deteriorated, while only 34 improved when compared to the prior year. Now, the key thing which we need to realise about terrorism, most of it happens within a conflict zone. 98% of terrorist attacks actually occur in a conflict zone. Now, the 4 deadliest groups in the world became more lethal. They killed 11% more people. So the lesser terrorist groups, they've killed less over time. There are now 7 Western countries in the worst 50. Now, the tail on this is it's very steep. So, for example, if we look at it, 86% of all terrorist deaths occurred in 10 countries. So, I'll give you an idea of just how steep it is. Now, when we're looking at the West, what we're finding is that 93% of all deaths were caused by a lone actor. These lone actors are very, very difficult to track down. So Islamic State and its affiliates, it's the deadliest group globally. They're active in 22 countries, but that's an increase of one more country from the prior year. So in each of those affiliates work, it's a bit like a franchise. So each of those affiliates work separately. There's no controlling a head of the organization. And the fighters are very, very fluid. They move from conflict to conflict according to where they think the best opportunities are and other related reasons as well. As I mentioned, the Sahel is the region most affected globally, and it accounts for about half of all terrorism deaths. So Burkina Faso, this will give you an idea of the 10 countries with the highest deaths from conflict. You'll note that every one of them is involved in a major conflict. Again, highlighting that most terrorist deaths, 98%, occur in a conflict zone. Now, this gives you an idea of the changing shape. It's really fluid. So if we look at the bright yellow bar, that was Iraq. We can see how that's improved dramatically. Deaths in Iraq are down 98% from the peak. You see that thin lever of maroon at the top? That's the deaths in the West. And you can see where the Sahel, when we went back to about 2010, virtually no deaths, but now it dominates. The other thing on this bar graph, which was interesting, is the bottom part at the bottom, which is the grey bar. That's all other countries. And so what we can see over time, since about 2012, that hasn't really changed much. So you've got this underlying level of terrorism, which seems to be always there, even if we picked up the big ones. So let's come back to the West, have a bit of a look there. So in the West, attacks peaked in 2017 and fell every year, been improving every year up until 2024, when it increased by about 60%. So that's up to 52 attacks in what we'd call the West being basically liberal democracies. And we can see that anti-Semitic and Islamic phobia incidents surged since the start of the Gaza war. We've seen that in Europe, Australia, and the US. And just to really drive that home, if you look at the 2 months since the start of the Gaza war in the US, anti-Semitic incidents were up 270%, while Islamophobic incidences were up 300%. So it just gives you a drive. So only 8% of the attacks in the West were carried out by a group. And this makes them very, very hard to detect, because individuals usually, they radicalize alone. They don't leave a financial footprint. And so it's very, very hard to track them down. The radicalization we're finding is happening faster. In 2002, it took about 16 months on average. By 2015, 13 years later, it was down to 10. And today, in many instances, it can happen within weeks. And so what we can see now is that Europe, the number of, if we look at and they're becoming younger too. We're finding that many of them now are classified as youth. So 40%, I think 42% of the attacks in the UK last year were considered youth. And in Europe, it's 1 in 5. So now let's come back and this is stuff I imagine you'll all know, but it's always good to put into a presentation if you're doing on peace. So let's come back and let's have a look at what actually creates peace. And we'd call that positive peace. Now, positive peace we arrive at because we've got the Global Peace Index, and we've got about 40,000 different data sets, indexes, attitudinal surveys, which we then run mathematical modeling and statistical analysis against to understand what are the factors that create peace. Now, when they come out, we then sort of look at them. We get rid of ones which are similar, go for the best data set, and then we have another process. We do statistical analysis to clump them together. So they come out in 8 different clumps. Then we give those clumps name, and they come back as what we call the pillars of positive peace. Now we can turn that round into an index again, and that becomes very, very powerful, because now we can see what else peace is associated with, which I'll come to in a minute. So now the power of this, architecture, and it's one which is getting picked up globally. It's empirically derived. It's not my ideas. It's not the researchers' ideas. It's purely derived from the data itself. Now, these are the 8 pillars. So now, these act as a system. One is not stand on its own. And I could go into a long talk now on systems theory, but I won't. What we need to say is that positive peace is a shortcut way in of being able to view a system. With that, it becomes very powerful. So we know this is strongly associated with peace, but what else is associated with? Higher per capita income. So, for example, countries which are improving in positive peace compared to deteriorating have twice the GDP growth rates. We find the resilience is stronger. So countries which are high in positive peace at the back end of COVID recovered quickly. Countries which were low in positive peace, many of them are still to recover from the impacts of COVID. We find there's better environmental outcomes using things like the Yale's measures of environmental impact. We find there's much stronger, higher measures of well-being and happiness. In fact, the correlation's about 0.93 for those who are interested in those kind of things. We find there's better performance on development as well. Therefore, positive peace in many ways describes an optimal environment in which human potential can flourish. And that, I think, is really important. So what creates peace also creates a whole lot of other optimal outcomes. So now, the positive peace, it's getting taken up in many, many different ways. So look, we've done activities last year, and many of them were fairly small, but it was in over 150 countries. Some of them quite Mickey Mouse, others were very substantial. As mentioned at the beginning, we've now got over 6,500 ambassadors. Again, they're spread over 150 countries. Just recently, the defense chief for Nigeria wrote a book on how to solve conflicts in Nigeria. First 3 chapters covered the background on the insurgencies. The next chapter was the 8 pillars of positive peace, highlighting the diagram which I had earlier on. And then the following 8 chapters were what you would do with each of those pillars of peace within Nigeria. And I've already mentioned that. So we've got a whole range of strategic relationships now, and these are growing all the time. So, for example, World Vision. So we're now undertaking a lot of research for World Vision, being able to map out where they should be doing their development, getting them a better understanding of the relationship between the child poverty and where they're programming. We're also they've standardized on positive peace, which they're implementing as their peace platform, and they're looking at doing that across all their operations around the world. I've just finished a whole series of training on it. And we've got other projects which we're now developing, which will further deepen the relationship in there. Philippines government, that's picked up positive peace. It's now implementing a program to measure peace in each of the barangays, which is the local district area that goes 42,000 of them in the Philippines. And then they've taken positive peace, adopted that into their national strategy as a whole of government approach to creating peace in the Philippines. And we've got various sorts of trainings we're currently discussing with them, and they've decided to do it, to take positive peace and include it in every program touching youth within the country. Northern Ireland, I was up in Northern Ireland about 3 months ago. We'll now be developing a Northern Ireland Peace Index. Met with the main group, Cooperation Ireland, which are responsible for implementing peace training and peace projects in Northern Ireland. They decided to pick up and are going to adopt positive peace going forward. And I met with the executive committee for Northern Ireland as well, who's now going to be making presentations to the government or the ministers in the government to adopt positive peace as well. And also, obviously, World Vision. We've got a very strong relationship with World Vision, and there's much more. So just a sample of some of the stuff we've done. In Iraq, we've trained religious leaders on positive peace up in northern Iraq. Libya, we trained 300 young leaders during the height of the civil war and brought them together on how to create peace within their cities. Thailand, we trained women's leaders there. We're working on peace initiatives along the Thai-Burma border. Colombia, we've trained ex-FARC combatants, community members on how to have harmoniously and exist. With multicultural New South Wales is the state in which Sydney is. They've undertaking a 4-year project to measure inter-community harmony and looking at research projects, but then finally holding a policy forum around how to improve inter-community harmony. What they're particularly worried about is we've got large immigration populations into Australia that are bringing in conflicts from other parts of the world. And Rotary, we've done a number of programs there, including successful programs in Uganda. So these are just the themes in which we actually do positive peace workshops. They range from working with Indigenous groups to the military and police. In fact, I've even given them to the police in Uganda, for example. We work with a lot of the poorest people in the world, worked on social cohesion, and worked with African pastoralists as well. So you can see it's a well-proven architecture used in many different ways. So now we're looking at, this is the final slide, if we're now looking at the relationship with Rotary, it's a 7-year partnership and it's going very, very strong. To date, we've trained 379 Rotary Peace activators. They're based in about 95 different countries. And between them, they've conducted about 1,500 different activities, investing about 15,000 hours all up. And these activities have reached about 15 million people. So it's quite a lot. And over 11,000 Rotary members have now taken the Rotary Positive Peace Academy, which specifically looks at positive peace in a Rotary setting. We regularly present at major conferences all around the world. And so we'll keep that up. Now, currently we're developing a new set of resources for clubs so they can access grants, district grants and global grants. So we're doing that in conjunction with Rotary. That's well underway. And there'll be more positive announcements coming in the near future. So at that point now, that, my friends, is the end of the presentation. So I'll now open it up for questions, I think.
That's fantastic. As always, Steve, it's a flood of information and it's just fantastic. So valuable. And we are so thankful that that we have such a thing as IEP. I've got a million questions, I know, but I open it up to the audience, and please use your virtual hand because we have larger than a screen and I cannot see everybody. So if you use your virtual hand, Cindy, that's not virtual, but I'm going to ask you anyway.
Thank
Cindy,
you, 'cause
roll.
I
have a
can't find my
question for-
virtual hand, so thank you.
That's virtual enough, Cindy.
Okay. My question is, how do you define terrorism? Because I was frankly surprised that the numbers or the red dots in the US were so low, because it seems to me we have a lot of domestic terrorism here in the United States, and that doesn't seem to be reflected in those numbers. But I could be misunderstanding. And
yeah, it depends on, look, it depends on your definition of terrorism. So what what might be referred as a terrorist act in the papers may not meet the definition of terrorism which we use in the Global Terrorism Index.
right, so that's why I'm asking, how
and-
are you defining it?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So there is no commonly accepted definition of terrorism. UNOCT is holding a conference in Istanbul in a couple of weeks where they'll be back debating it yet again. We've been asked to speak at it, but yeah, so I don't think we're going to get anywhere soon in terms of being able to understand it. So now the definition of terrorism, which we use, it's an act of violence perpetuated on a group with the aim of sending a message, which for a religious, political, or economic motive, with the aim of sending a message to a group more than the people who are affected. That's the definition. Now, we've got a data set which is developed by an organisation out of the UK. That's the data set which we use. And that's the definition they've got. That's basically the same definition.
Thank you.
So, yeah, Kurt, I saw you put up something there about not being an ambassador because you didn't buy a certificate. That's not correct. So if you've done the or you're an activator, I think that's not correct. If you've done the activation course, you don't have to buy any certificates. Certificates are totally voluntarily. We use that as a way to try and help cover the costs, which costs us to actually develop and deliver the courses.
You know, Steve, I'm not even interested in or concerned so much about the certificate. I just put into the chat something that I feel that is quite necessary for us to actually allow the ideas of what the Institute is doing and what Rotary is trying to do and what so many of us in our whole history and our time on the earth have been trying to bring into our lives, which is peace. And how can we get young people to think about it and enact it and to be able to reach out and do something at their level in the way that they can do it with where they are. And it doesn't incorporate any needs for funds because it can be simple little things that people can do. And it is something that they can create the ideas themselves. Bill Graham, who is a Rotary Dare to Be Great leader, mentioned how a 10-year-old girl got millions of dollars donated by only incorporating all her friends' kids to be able to generate several $1 million to a Katrina fundraising or some other kind of fundraising as that was for about, and she did it twice. Because she was so praised. Well, why? How can anybody at your age do it? She did it twice. If we can get
thank you, thank you. In our limited time here, I'm hoping that we can keep this to questions only. Steve and Catherine has had her hand up, if I can say it right. Catherine.
Hi, Jim. Thank you, and thank you for this really good presentation. I actually am a Rotary Peace Fellow, and I also helped found and run an international solidarity network called Solidarity 2020 and Beyond. And we work in at least 80 countries in major war and conflict zones around the world, mainly the global South. So, you know, I see a lot of the countries that we work in and have members in that you talked about, Steve, on the list.
Yeah, no,
Burkina Faso, Pakistan, Afghanistan, just going down the line, Middle East, etc. So I just had a couple of comments and one question also. One is
the question. Keep it to the question.
Okay, so two questions. Basically, when you're talking about it, and I totally agree 100% that the investment in peace is very low throughout the world, and that obviously has to really increase for us to get closer to peace and to a lack of global violence and wars. But I just wanted to put out there, I think equally important, and I wanted your comment, was the fact that the investment in war is so high and so out of control, as you mentioned, and that should also, I think, be an area of our work to decrease that expenditure and to focus on human needs. So that's a question. Secondly, I just wanted to ask you about Israel. When you're mentioning that in general, the amounts of GDP go down with countries of conflict, the recent information I'm seeing with Israeli genocide is actually their GDP and their stock market is really going up. And that has to do with all of their investments in war, intelligence, security that now others are buying because they're actually testing it on the Gazans. And so just a question on whether you've seen that as well, and then where you got the information on the anti-Semitism growing so much, because again, I work in this area extensively, and we're seeing that if you take away the connection of anti-Semitism and Zionism or criticism of Israel as a state, that the anti-Semitism figures are much less increasing, and that I just had a question where you're
Okay,
getting
so,
those figures.
yeah, so I can't tell you off the top of my head where we've got the figures. We would have got them, sourced them from the organization in the US.
Yeah, you don't want
and
ADL
and
because
it's
it's
re- and
been
it's
found to
re-
be very
it's re- it's-
problematic.
and it's
Yeah.
really a measure of hate crimes rather than it's your comments on the Gaza war. Okay, so that's the origin of that. Now, if we come back to the first one, military expenditure, there is a need for military expenditure. Okay, so you're not going to be able to stop people like Putin or Z unless you've got robust defence. So there's a need for defence spending, but there's ways of being able to look at it and look at it a lot more intelligently than what we're doing. So now one of the things, and haven't got it in this slide presentation, it's the cut down one. So we did some research on the amount spent on defence between NATO countries, ex the US, and Russia. And so the European countries, which are a member of NATO, spend 4 times what Russia spends on defence. Now, when we look at the effectiveness of the fighting forces, they're only about 20% stronger than Russia. So the real issue is the ineffectiveness of the Europeans to come together as a coherent fighting force. So I'll give you an idea. So in Italy, for example, you've got Italian guns. By law, you can only put an Italian bullet in an Italian gun. So they want to make tanks. Each of the countries make a separate tank. So in Germany, for example, they make their tanks, but they make them by hand because they're not making enough for a production line. And you'll find a similar thing repeated in a whole range of other countries. So one of the key issues and military abilities to be able to contain military expenditure is being able to focus on efficiencies which you can get rather than that. Now that was 2 of your 3 questions. What was the question in the middle?
Sorry, just about the GDP, if you've looked at Israel over the last year, if it's increasing versus.
So this gets complicated. So the conflict is not being fought in Israel, it's being fought in the Palestine territories. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing, when countries are at war, quite often the GDP goes up, and that's why a lot of people say war is good for the economy. But what happens is that comes at a cost. And so what it happens is you hollow out a lot of your other industries, as you're saying, becomes down into defence. So you hollow them out. The other thing is you tend to borrow a lot more money too. And that then subsequently erodes GDP growth because you now got to pay the debt off. So, for example, and I'm sure you're aware of this one, but in the States now, your interest bill is larger than your defence bill. And so that money, in many ways, can be spent on a whole lot of other productive things. And so what happens is the effects of it usually come through over time, unless the war is being fought in your country. Now, if it's fought in your country, that destroys your assets. So the assets and infrastructure get destroyed, so does the economy come down.
Great. Suzanne, you have a question. You're next.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Steve, for a really nice, meaty presentation. My question relates to positive peace. I think it's a great concept. The critique of it, though, is that it kind of describes a utopia. And so, do you have any sort of guidance or ways to think about positive peace as a way that it could be used for sort of designing interventions, or kind of diagnosing where positive peace needs to be built, in what
Sure.
ways it needs to be built in a
Okay.
given location?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, now that's really good. So what we've got is generalized architecture. Okay. It's systemic in base. But if we're looking at it, when we're looking at the interventions, what they might be, they're different in different environments. So the concept is it's positive and it's forward looking. So look, we're not about going back and trying to resolve the grievances of the past. Rather, we'd be looking at taking parties, finding a common problem, and then having them work together on the solution to that problem. So that was one of the powerful things we learned out of that Libyan experiment, because we had these young leaders in, and they came from the wealthy families, the power elites, and they came from cities which were warring. And like at the end of it, they said, look, we never thought we'd be in the same room, yet agreeing on what we should do. And that's because we focused on the cities. We didn't focus on the country, because that would have ended up in sort of a whole lot of recriminations. You're right, I'm right, you're wrong, etc. But when they looked down within their city, they all had the same issues. Like they wanted to stop crime, that getting the garbage picked up, being able to find jobs, all were quite common. Now, that all comes out of a positive peace architecture. So now, if you're working, if you're working within a community, you can use it in a number of different ways. So the first is you get the community now to determine what the interventions they should do for each of the 8 pillars. First, define the problem you're trying to solve. You see, you go in and you haven't got a clear problem you're trying to solve. You end up then, it just ends up at pretty high level, utopian talk. Okay, so you're right there, can easily head that way if not managed properly, Suzanne. So you get a problem. Okay, what is the problem in the community you want to solve? And it can be as simple, and I'll give you a classic example out of Rotary. Okay, this is the one out of Uganda. So they'd been running a literacy program in a school for a number of years and had got nowhere. Then they decided to use the positive peace architecture. So they then worked out interventions for each of the 8 pillars, and 3 of them were really impactful, So the first one was acceptance of the rights of others. So that was with girls. So a lot of them weren't coming to school 4 days a month when they were menstruating. So they provided sanitary pads and put in a couple of separate toilet blocks for them. The next one was feeding. Okay, so there was no good relationships with neighbours. So they had all this conflict because it was in a rural setting with the neighbours, because the neighbours would have some fruit trees, things like that. The kids at lunchtime were going out and raiding all the oranges and such off the trees, and this is in a really poor area. I mean, so every orange mattered. Okay, every orange mattered. So they then introduced a porridge program at lunchtime, and it was costing 1 or 2 cents for the porridge. Okay. Now, that was great, okay? And I'll come back to why in a minute. And the third one was that they'd go out on the radios and talk about the program in the schools. And they were providing food and this kind of stuff. So now what happened is the number of kids going to school increased by about 160%. And the academic performance doubled. So they used to have 30% of the kids in the top 2 divisions in the district. That went up to 60%. Now, why? Okay. So one is the kids were getting some nutrients. So the brain stayed active through the afternoon, whereas before the brains weren't active. Okay. Because this is incredibly poor. Now, on the radio, they talk about the food at the school. So what would happen now is the parents would start to send their kids to school, because that meant they got fed. Okay, whereas before they didn't have the money, they just have to go out and forage for themselves. So so the idea is really find a problem, get the community to work out what the interactions are, because it's really easy for us to come in with our Western values and say all sorts of things which just quite often don't match with the values in these local communities. Yeah. So anyway, I hope that helps, Susan.
Yes, thank you. And I like how it was multi-pronged, so come at the same problem from multiple different kinds
Yeah,
of
that's
interventions. Yeah.
That's what you've got to do. You've got to work out stuff for all the 8 pillars because it's systemic. And like you can introduce causes into systems, but like it's not cause and effect. Okay, there can be a cause, but that ripples through a system and has all sorts of changes. And removing the cause doesn't necessarily get rid of the problems. It's a cause quite. So it's more about relationships and flows than it is about cause and effect.
That's a powerful line. It's not causes, it's a project. Thank you. Tom, your hand was up next.
Okay, thank you. I was really happy to see that the partnership with Rotary was 7 years and strong and moving ahead. I was one of the original group of Positive Peace activators, along with Patricia, Jim Halder, and I think Rudy. And I was also took part in the second cohort training for North America in Evanston a year ago. And I could see how the program had grown and had gotten stronger as we've gone along. But then we heard that Summer Lewis's contract ended, and we feel activators, we all feel kind of in limbo.
Yeah.
Is the partnership with IEP and Rotary still going on? And are there thoughts about how to keep the momentum going with the activators?
Sure. Now, look, it's a really good question. First thing I'd say is the relationship we had came under the focus for strategic relationship. They had two others of those with really large organisations. So what they did, so they've decided to revisit the way they go about doing all of this. Okay, so they're not doing this. So all 3 strategic partnerships they finished. Now that time, then they finished up Summer Lewis. Now a lot of the stuff was poorly communicated. Okay, I'm going to be really blunt here. Like the Rotary communicated it really quite poorly, the whole thing. So now what's happening is we're in the process, and I can't say too much about it, but we're developing a whole series of new materials at the moment. There's quite a large grant we got from Rotary to do it. So we're in the process of doing that. We're looking at new ways of to engage going forward. So like what they're doing is going to be a lot more holistic for peace than what's happening now. Now, at this stage, they haven't publicly announced it, so I can't really talk to it. I'm sorry, Tom. But look, hang on to your seat. It's still going to be there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no, look, I think when it all comes through, and it's going to take some months, I think you'll be fairly
I mean, it was just disappointing to what happened.
Yeah, I know. It was just
the lack of transparency and
it
still kind of feels
the whole thing was poorly communicated.
like some activators should be involved in this next step.
Thank you, Tom. And I believe Patricia, your hand is up next.
Yes. It's interesting though, because Tom's question and Steve's response kind of changes the nature of my question. So let me say it this way. So Steve, I am one of the biggest proponents, I think, of the work of IEP.
So what I'd publicly state is Patricia does a tremendous job. Okay, she's like this, she's active in so many different areas. Yeah. So look, we're really appreciative of the work you do, Patricia.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. And I love working with everybody at IEP. And so what I wanted to say to those who maybe haven't experienced really using some of the data or the indices or the 8 pillars in particular is it is one of, if not the best framework that I have been able to use in peace building. It doesn't matter if it's Birmingham, Alabama, or Beirut, Lebanon, or Manila, Philippines, or where else could I name? Juba, South Sudan. We use it over and over and over again. We use it with all age groups. And to the gentleman who talked about the power of young people, what I have found is this framework, even put in the hands of young people, 14 years old, they get it. And so it changes their way of thinking about how to solve problems so that it's not sort of Band-Aid approaches, it's systemic. So I do want to say that. And if anybody wanted, sharing of information, I'd be happy to. I guess my question, Steve, goes to partnership. And it's, to me, the ideal of IEP and Rotary was you have all of this unique data and research and processing of information. Rotary has 1.4 million members and a 100-year history of being committed to peace and all kinds of permutations of that. To me, what hasn't come through is the implementation, the use of these really good tools broadly within Rotary. And even if you come out with new tools, it's hard to imagine that is going to change dramatically. So if you could ask Rotarians as a partnership, if you could suggest, what can we do differently that would just better operationalize the use of these tools? What would you ask us to do as a partner?
I think this part of it is like is being able to get grants at the at the Rotary Club level, district grants, and some of the global grants, so that they then team up with the activators to deliver projects within your club. So I think that's, and I think if I'm going to look at IEP, because we've got a limited number of resources, but we haven't actually stimulated the Rotary clubs enough. And I think if there's one area where that's where it is. But for the Rotary clubs, like all you people there understand this better than me. Like Rudy and myself have spoken about this a number of times. But it needs to be something which is simple for the Rotary Club to roll out. Okay, so you really need a number of cookie cut projects which a Rotary Club can say, yeah, look, we really get behind this in our local community. Okay, and because the framework, you can use the framework, and it can be just doing something in a local area. Okay, how to better feed the homeless. It can be as simple as that. And you use the 8 pillars to actually do the implementation of understanding how to do that. Something like that. But it has to be something which is pretty simple, because the Rotary clubs themselves won't think through the creative part of how to use. But like you've done that well, Patricia, and there could be stuff there you can roll out with to Rotary clubs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I've just got a couple of quick questions before we close. But you've talked a lot about what the individual terrorists are doing. Are the individual terrorists part of or guided by a larger group or connected with?
Yeah, it's a good question. So as I mentioned, 92% of all deaths occurred by a lone actor. The number of attacks is not quite as high, but I focused on the deaths. The way they radicalize in all sorts of different ways. Okay, so there's a profile of what they're like. Quite often they're loners. That people without much opportunity quite often can have a mental illness, then when they self-radicalize, they can self-radicalize from almost conflicting narratives in a way. So they might pick up on the propaganda, let's say, from Islamic State in one place or area. They might pick up in another way in picking up from conspiracy theorists. Okay, and so they then create this worldview. Most of them haven't got much opportunity in life. This gives them a sense of meaning and purpose. and then they acted out.
One quick question. China, you're sharing some information on China that is really not hitting our news. That's a fairly sizable amount of debt that you would suggest. Is that going to be the limit to their zenith? And what is?
Okay, so if we're looking at debt globally, it's about $340 trillion. So, okay, so and growing. So what you're seeing in the US in particular, so if you notice last week, there was a wobble on the bond markets that caused the share market to drop, but it is recovering. So there's concern over US debt, UK debt, and European debt. Because the levels of debt and they're rising. So this is a broader discussion globally. But China at the moment has got very exceptionally high debt. Now, generally the way it's being looked at is this is going to be a real drag going further on the economy. So as we look at it, China's got a birth rate below 1. I think it's about 0.84 per woman. Okay, so the population's dropping. It's dropping. Now, this also now creates a whole lot of other issues within the economy as well, because it means it's taken another 20 years to really hit. But at that point, you're just going to have so many old people and a lot fewer young people to be able to support them. And that'll happen in the States if you don't have immigration, but nowhere near as severe. You then combine that with a fall off of foreign direct investment, because that foreign direct investment mainly came from the US and Europe. Okay, and we can see where the US is, but Europe is getting very reluctant in terms of the views of China as well. So now the structural debts in China, a lot of them are around property. And you've got all these hidden debt as well. This is the debts known of. They rely on these state-owned SOE, state-owned enterprises. And so the state-owned enterprises now, they're very shadowy. And so you've got this combination of state, you've got this combination of a state and private business. So you can get companies, and so the government picks a private business, then pumps all this money into them, quite often can pick up controlling stock as well. And so this, with the large property debts, it's really, really hard to unwind, because they don't want the debt bubble to burst, because that'd create a major recession. So they're trying to prop it up and slowly move their way through it. So which means there's a very, very long tail on this in relations to economic growth. And that's what happened in Japan, okay? They don't want to, so they want to try and work their way out of it, but it takes a long, long while. One of the things China's debt is, it's mainly internal. So they don't have to worry about a collapse from external parties, which is more the issue for the US.
Last question, and I'm not sure if you have the answer, but I get the feeling India is trying to look for the best deal. Where is India going to end up relationship-wise, and with whom?
Yeah, well, historically, India and China have been enemies. The issue for China is it's one of the largest refiners of petroleum in the world, and they refine a lot of the Russian oil and then ship it back out to the West, and that's what Trump's trying to go after at the moment, trying to stop him doing that. So obviously India doesn't like that, and so it's got a pivot, which we can see in the Shanghai Forum over the last couple of days. But there will be more alignment, but it's hard, but it's very hard for me to see India and China ending up in the same bed together. Now, there's about imports from China. One of the big things they take is petroleum from India. That's one of their one of their biggest imports. So I think India will try and look at maybe positioning to try and get better deal with the US, but it's hard. They've got disputed borders, things like that, so it's hard, and all these, and a lot of bad history. So it's hard for me to see them ending up strategic partners.
Interesting.
You could say the same thing about Russia and China. Like there's many in China in the military and in the Politburo that feel that they got a bad deal under one of the czars, sort of 200 years ago, which now defines the borders, and that should be renegotiated. So at the moment, none of that's coming through, but for the longer term, they're not exactly natural allies. And I think sort of if you're looking at the Western liberal democracies, in many ways they're natural allies because of shared values and such. But China's got border disputes with everyone on its borders.
Interesting. Steve, we are so indebted and thankful for all the information and everything you bring to us, and for the phenomenal work you do in the world and the information you bring to us. Thank you for taking the time. I know your schedule was very busy, and I am very grateful that you took your time to share with us tonight. Wow, what an experience. Thank you very, very much. Next month, we're going to be honored to have Brian Farr, an attorney for 40 years, 30 years in the Utah Attorney General. In 2008, he graduated from Chulalongkorn as a Rotary Peace Fellow, and also the author of Your Piece of Peace, which is, I think, one of the most important pieces of literature written for those beginning in peace efforts. Again, Steve, we can't thank you enough for your tremendous work, what you bring, and the information you brought to us tonight. Again, we thank you, and we kept Allison awake. And I didn't get you the coffee, Allison.
So thank you, Jim. Enjoyed the presentation, and I'll see you all later.